Emotional eating and how to stop it. Do you eat to feel better or relieve stress? These tips can help stop emotional eating, fight cravings, identify triggers, and find more satisfying ways to feed your feelings. So, what is emotional eating? We don't always eat just to satisfy physical hunger. Many of us also turn to food for comfort, stress relief, or to reward ourselves. And when we do, we tend to reach for junk food, sweets, and other comforting but unhealthy foods. You might reach for a tub of ice cream when you're feeling down, or order pizza if you're bored or lonely, or swing by that drive-through after a stressful day at work. Emotional eating is using food to make yourself feel better, to fill those emotional needs rather than your stomach. Unfortunately, emotional eating doesn't fix emotional problems. In fact, it usually makes you feel worse. Afterwards, not only does the original emotional issue remain, but you also feel guilty for overeating. Now, how do you know if you're an emotional eater? Well, do you eat more when you're feeling stressed? Do you eat when you're not hungry or when you're full? Do you eat to feel better, to calm or soothe yourself when you're sad, mad, bored, anxious, etc.? Do you reward yourself with food? Do you regularly eat until you stuffed yourself? Does food make you feel safe? Do you feel like food is your friend? Do you feel powerless or out of control with food? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you're an emotional eater. But what is the emotional eating cycle? Well, occasionally using food as a pick me up, a reward, or to celebrate isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when eating is your primary emotional coping mechanism, when your first impulse is to open the fridge whenever you're stressed, upset, angry, lonely, exhausted, or bored, you get stuck in an unhealthy cycle when the real feeling or problem is never actually addressed. So, how does this emotional eating cycle work? Well, it normally starts when something happens that upsets you. Then you get this overwhelming urge to eat. Then you end up eating more than you know you should. Then you start feeling guilty and powerless over food. That then triggers this feeling of upset and it starts this vicious cycle. Emotional hunger can't be filled with food. Eating may feel good in the moment, but the feelings that trigger the eating are still there. And you often feel worse than you did before you because of the unnecessary calories you've just consumed. You beat yourself up for messing up and not having more willpower. This then compounds the problem. You stop learning healthier ways to deal with your emotions. You have a harder and harder time controlling your weight, and you feel increasingly powerless over both food and your feelings. But no matter how powerless you feel over food and your feelings, it is possible to make a positive change. You can learn healthier ways to deal with your emotions, avoid triggers, conquer cravings, finally put a stop to emotional eating. So let's look at the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger. Before you can break free from the cycle of emotional eating, you first need to learn how to distinguish between emotional and physical hunger. And this can be trickier than it sounds, especially if you regularly use food to deal with your feelings. See, emotional hunger can be powerful, so it's easy to mistake it for physical hunger. But there are clues you can look for help you tell physical and emotional hunger apart. See, let's look at them. Emotional hunger. This comes on suddenly. It hits you in an instant and feels overwhelming and urgent. Physical hunger, on the other hand, comes on more gradually. The urge to eat doesn't feel as dire or demand instant satisfaction, unless, of course, you haven't eaten for a very long time. You see, emotional hunger comes on suddenly. So, emotional hunger craves specific comfort foods. When you're physically hungry, almost anything sounds good, including healthy stuff like vegetables. But emotional hunger craves junk food, sugary snacks that provide that instant rush. You'll feel like you need that slice of cake or that piece of pizza or those crisps or that chocolate. Nothing else will do. Emotional hunger often leads to mindless eating. Before you know it, you've eaten a whole bag of crisps, an entire tub of ice cream. You haven't even paid any attention to it, or you weren't even fully enjoying it. When you're eating in response to physical hunger, you're typically more aware of what you're doing. And emotional hunger isn't satisfied once you're full. You keep wanting more and more, often eating till you're uncomfortably stuffed. Physical hunger, on the other hand, doesn't need to be stuffed. You feel satisfied when your stomach is full. Emotional hunger isn't located in the stomach. Rather than a growling belly or a pang in your stomach, you feel your hunger as a craving. You can't get it out of your head. You're focused on specific textures, tastes, and smells. And emotional hunger often leads to regret, guilt, or shame. When you eat to satisfy physical hunger, you're unlikely to feel guilty or ashamed because you're simply giving your body what it needs. If you feel guilty after you eat, it's likely because you know deep down that you're not eating for nutritious reasons. So, how can you identify your emotional eating triggers? Well, the first step to putting a stop to emotional eating is identifying your personal triggers. What situations, places, or feelings make you reach for comfort or food? Most emotional eating is linked to unpleasant feelings, but it can also be triggered by positive emotions, such as rewarding yourself for achieving a goal or celebrating a holiday or a happy event. So, common causes of emotional eating. Well, stress. Ever notice how stress makes you hungry? It's not just in your mind. When stress is chronic, or it is so often in our chaotic, fast paced world, your body produces high levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol triggers cravings for salty, sweet, and fried foods. Foods that give you a burst of energy and pleasure. The more uncontrolled stress in your life, the more likely you are to turn to food for emotional relief. Stuffing emotions. Eating can be a way of temporarily silence or stuff down uncomfortable emotions, including anger, fear, sadness, anxiety, loneliness, resentment, and shame. While you're numbing yourself with food, you can avoid the difficult emotions you'd rather not feel. Boredom or feeling of emptiness. Do you ever eat simply to give yourself something to do to relieve boredom, or as a way to fill a void in your life? You feel unfulfilled and empty, and the food is your way to occupy your mouth and your time. In a moment, it fills you up and distracts you from underlying feelings of purposelessness and dissatisfaction in your life. Childhood habits. Think back to your childhood memories of food. Did your parents reward good behaviour with ice cream? Take you out for a meal when you got a good school report? Or serve you sweets when you're feeling sad? These habits can often carry over into adulthood, or your eating may be driven by nostalgia for that cherished memory of the Sunday dinner with your gran, or baking or eating biscuits or cakes with your mum. Social influences. Getting together with other people for a meal is a great way to relieve stress, but it can also lead to overeating. It's easy to overindulge simply because the food is there, or because everyone else is eating. You may also overeat in social situations out of nervousness, or perhaps your family or circle of friends encourages you to overeat, and it's easier to go along with the group. So, how can I start to get a grip of these things? Well, start keeping an emotional eating diary. Now, this could be something as simple as a notes section in your phone. You've probably recognized yourself in at least a few of the previous descriptions, but even so, you'll want to get even more specific. One of the best ways to identify the patterns behind your emotional eating is to keep track with a food and mood diary. Every time you overeat or feel compelled to reach for your version of comfort food, like kryptonite, take a moment to figure out what triggered that urge. If you backtrack, you'll usually find an upsetting event that kicked off your emotional eating cycle, or a positive, happy event. Write it all down in your food and mood diary: what you ate or wanted to eat, what happened to upset you, how you felt before you ate, what you felt as you were eating, and how you felt afterwards. Over time, you'll see a pattern emerge. Maybe you'll always end up gorging yourself after spending time with a critical friend, or perhaps you stress eat whenever you're on a deadline, or when you attend family functions. Once you identify your emotional eating triggers, the next step is identifying healthier ways to feed your feelings. So, how can we find other ways to feed your feelings? If you don't know how to manage your emotions in a way that doesn't involve food, you won't be able to control your eating habits for very long. Diets so often fail because they offer logical nutritional advice which only works if you have a conscious control over your eating habits. It doesn't work when emotions hijack the process, demanding an immediate payoff of food. So, in order to stop emotional eating, you have to find other ways to fulfill yourself emotionally. It's not enough to understand the cycle of emotional eating or even to understand your triggers, although that's a huge first step. You need to find alternatives to food that you can turn to for emotional fulfillment. So, what are some alternatives to emotional eating? Well, if you're depressed or lonely, call someone who always makes you feel better. Play with your dog or your cat. Or pick up your phone and look through your photo albums. Or have a look at a cherished memento. If you're anxious, expend your nervous energy by going for a walk, squeezing a stress ball, dancing around the kitchen. If you're exhausted, treat yourself to that hot cup of tea, that relaxing hot chocolate. Take a bath, light some candles, wrap yourself in a warm blanket. If you're bored, read a good book. Watch that comedy show. Explore the outdoors. Or turn to activity you enjoy. Or get that task done you keep putting off. If you're bored, you must have a to-do list. You must have things to do. Get them done. Because not only do you get that task done, you've got a positive impact. And you've taken one thing off your list. That's all well and good. So you've cravings hit in, right? How can we pause this? How can we pause when cravings hit and check in with yourself? Well, most emotional eaters feel powerless over their food cravings. When the urge to eat hits, it's all you can think about. Where you feel like almost unbearable tension that demands to be fed right now. Because you've tried to resist in the past and failed, you believe that your willpower just isn't up to it. But the truth is that you have more power over your cravings than you think. All you've done is create this limited belief that you can't stop this because you haven't put the habits in place. So let's try this technique. Take 5 before you give in to that craving. See, emotional eating tends to be automatic and virtually mindless. Before you even realize what you're doing, you've demolished that tub of ice cream, you ate half of it. But if you can take that moment to pause and reflect when you hit with a craving, you give yourself an opportunity to make a different decision. See, can you actually put off eating for 5 minutes? Maybe not. Why don't you start with 1 minute? Don't tell yourself you can't give in to the craving. Remember, the forbidden is extremely tempting. Just tell yourself to wait. Just put it off. So I'll do it later. I'll have it later. Now, while you're waiting, check in with yourself. How are you feeling? What's going on emotionally? Even if you end up eating, you'll have a better understanding of why you did it. This can help you set yourself up for a different response next time. And then learn to accept your feelings, even the bad ones. While it may seem that the core problem is that you're powerless over food, emotionally eating actually stems from feeling powerless over your emotions. You don't feel capable of dealing with your feelings head on, so you avoid them with food. Allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable emotions can be very scary. You may fear that, like Pandora's box, once you've opened the door, you won't be able to shut it. But the truth is that when we don't obsess over or suppress our emotions, even the most painful and difficult feelings subside relatively quickly and lose their power to control our attention. To do this, though, you need to become mindful and learn how to stay connected to your moment to moment emotional experience. This can help you rein in stress and remove emotional problems that can often trigger emotional eating. And then try indulging without overeating by savoring your food. When you eat to feed your feelings, you tend to do so quickly, mindlessly consuming food on an autopilot. You eat so fast you miss out on the different taste and texture of food, as well as your body's cues that you're full and no longer hungry. But by slowing down, savoring every bite, you'll not only you enjoy your food more, but you'll also be less likely to overeat. Slowing down and savoring your food is an important aspect of mindful eating, the opposite of mindless emotional eating. Try taking a few deep breaths before starting your food, putting your utensils down between bites, and really focusing on the experience of eating. Pay attention to the textures, shapes, colors, smells of your food. How does each mouthful taste? How does it make your body feel? By slowing down in this way, you'll find that you appreciate each bite of your food much more. You can even indulge in your favorite foods and you'll feel full on much less. It takes time for the body's fullness signal to reach your brain, so taking a few moments to consider how you feel after each bite, hungry or satiated, can help you avoid overeating. So, how can I practice mindful eating? Well, eating while you're also doing other things, such as watching TV, driving, or playing on your phone, can prevent you from fully enjoying your food. Since your mind is elsewhere, you may not feel satisfied or continue eating, even though you're no longer hungry. Eating more mindfully can help you focus on your mind, on your food, and the pleasure of your meal, and curb overeating. So hopefully that's been really useful, and I hope you had some information. If you want to find out how you can end emotional eating in 90 days or less, then why don't you join my TX90 program, where we have modules. We have 30 modules of information. You have 4 coaching calls a week. You have a world-class food and mood journal, and you get to work one-to-one with me. If you want more details, drop a DM to me or put in the comments below TX90 and I'll get them across to you.